Hello and welcome to Whisky.com, where fine spirits meet. And today I'm at the Fynton River. And behind me is the Fynton Viaduct. It's a masterpiece of British engineering, and it was built in the Victorian age, kind of a golden age for engineering, especially in Britain. And it was started building in 1894 and finished in 1897, and it connected the city of Inverness with the rest of the British Rail, so everybody could easily access the highlands, because up till now it was pretty remote backland. You couldn't really access it, and if you have a railway there then you could transport goods up there and take whiskey back. And that's why we're here today. We have a very nice distillery that we're gonna visit, and yeah, let's see how that works. So the distilling around here is a very historical thing, because here we actually have a distilling business that dates back to 1747, and there is an old ruin next to the distillery. And in 1747 the British government found illicit distilling, and they actually found a still here, and probably it got sold off or confiscated and then auctioned off or something like that, but they actually written down how much the still was worth, and it was worth 7 pounds of silver, of sterling silver. And yeah, 7 pounds, that 4 kilo, maybe a bit less than that. So it must have been quite a big still for illicit distilling. That was pretty big. And the place around here was perfect for illicit distilling, because there was a lot of juniper growing around here. And Tomatin actually is the name, the Gaelic name for hill which grows juniper, or juniper hill or something like that. So juniper, the plant, if you burn it, it doesn't make any smoke. So you can't be detected by any policeman or anybody that is would confiscate your stills. So that's why illicit distilling was pretty big here around here. So someone got caught in 1747, and that's when kind of the starting point here is written down. The distillery was built by a guy named John McDougall, and he was a townsman, and he was very dedicated to the town, and he wanted to develop the town. So he saw the opportunity with the railway, and he saw we have good water around here, we now have the railway connection, and he then saw it obvious that you should build a whiskey distillery around here. So they built the whiskey distillery in 1897, and they also built a few houses, and there are now in total 30 houses that actually belong to the distillery, and they rent it out to their workers. So it's kind of a nice place where you can work on site. It was going well for the distillery. They were selling off regionally. They could sell it off with the railway and sell it off to blenders. And in 1906 there was a big crash with whiskey. It's called the Patterson crash, and that was because of a blending family called the Patterson family, or the Patterson company. They were having up-to-date marketing. Back in the days they imported parrots, trained them to say buy Patterson whiskey or drink Patterson whiskey, got them to the bars, and the people were furious. They were happy, and it was really exciting, and they were all drinking these Patterson whiskey. And these guys were writing in their books that they had more stocks, or they had valued their stocks more than they had. It was kind of a speculation bubble back in the days with whiskey, and that kind of crashed. And the distillery then, a lot of distilleries went bankrupt over that Patterson crash, and also the distillery of Tomatin. They had to shut down, and in 1909 they actually got bought by wine merchants from London, And that was a really, really good move, because they got nice wine casks from these wine merchants, and these wine merchants had really good connections even over to the US. And the distillery has records back from the 1920s where they get bourbon casks, and that was kind of special back in the days. It was all sherry and port. So the distillery was kind of exciting, and it went upwards, it expanded, it was massive. And yeah, so it was at the point of time in 1974, it was the biggest distillery in Scotland and the biggest malt distillery in the world. So it was really dominating with 23 stills, and the market was really dependent on Tomatin. They could kind of manage the market themselves. But it was all going into the blending industry, and there was a big crash with the blending industry, or the recession that went down in the 80s, and that was when Tomatin, it wasn't good business for Tomatin, so they actually went into liquidation again. And yeah, they got bought by a Japanese company in 1986, and yeah, so they invested in here and transformed the business, and now the Tomatin Distillery nearly does 100% single malt whiskey. They have a bit of casks they fill and ship them off and trade them with other distilleries, but that's just to produce their own blends. So that's kind of their thing. They only want to produce their own products, but they also do have a few blends, so that's what they're gonna do. Yeah, that was it. Let's have a look at how the whiskey is being produced. The distillery gets their water from the Altna Fris. Fris is the Gaelic word for deer, and the country around here has that name. So that's why the burn is called Altna Fris. It comes from the Mondalis mountains, and yeah, the water runs through granite, it runs through moors, peat, and is filtered very, very, very much. So the minerals are really out of the water. It's a very, very, very mineral low water. And minerals in the water are not good for whiskey production. So with that mineral low water, you get a really, really nice tasting whiskey. The burn doesn't actually go very far, and it then leads into the Findron, which is a bigger river, like as big as the Spey. But it runs parallel to the Spey, and it doesn't go into the Spey. So this here is therefore not the Spey side, because it doesn't go into the Spey, but it is a highland distillery. And yeah, let's go inside and see the production from inside. The second ingredient for whiskey is malt. And I've already mentioned that the distillery used to be like the biggest distillery in Scotland, and therefore some of their equipment is still too big for them. For example, the malt bins. They have 10 malt bins with 50 tons of capacity. So they can actually store 500 tons of malt in here, which is far, far, far too big for the current production. But they're not decommissioning them or deconstructing them, because they don't need to, and it's kind of good if you have more storage capacity. You can buy for bad times and come over these bad times. If you then have the malt, it is going into this malt mill, and it's a Porteous malt mill. But I've already told a lot about this Porteous malt mills, and these malt mills used to be really, really, really old. And the company that made it, these machines were too good. They were not selling any replacement machines, so they went bankrupt. But the machines were really good. So they actually got the machines, the construction drawings and the patents and everything got sold to Richard Sizes Limited. And they actually continued building these machines because there were still some distilleries opening up and there was still some demand, and they were building it. So this is a bit of a younger model, still probably 50 years old or something like that, but easily over 50 years old. But it's a bit of a bigger model, as I can see it here. And it grinds down the malt into a coarse grist that is perfect for whiskey creation. The distillery gets only Scottish grain that is malted by independent malters, And so yeah, kind of a regional product here. And 1 week of the year they actually doing peated malts, and the malt is varied because they want to have a bit of a variety for their Cubocan malts, but they tend to go with the more light or medium peated malt. So around 15 ppm is what they typically do, but they even went one time as far as 45 ppm, so heavily peated. And yeah, one time a year they do the peated and everything else is unpeated. And after it's then here grinded down into a coarse grist, we find it back in the mash tun. This mash tun is actually a bit older. It was built in the 1970s. It's stainless steel mash tun, so it's very energy efficient, and it is being filled with 9 tons of grist, and then you have 3 washings to get all the sugar and a bit of the starches out as well. And they start off with 32,000 liters at 60 degrees Celsius. So this is the first one where you get the most sugar out. Then you have 14,500 liters at 76 degrees Celsius. You still get a lot of sugar out there, a bit less than you get from the first one. And the third wash, that is 15,000 liters and has about at above 90 degrees Celsius. So you get all the rest out, but it's so low on sugar that it's not really suitable for fermentation. So you kind of store it and use the water in the next batch as the water for washing out the sugars. And all the sugar water that is being collected is now really perfect for alcoholic fermentation, which we'll see in the next step. The fermentation at Tomatin is really special, but let's come to the numbers. They have 12 wash bags and they store 45,000 liters of wort in it. And after they added the yeast, they ferment for a really long time. It's 168 hours. This is 1 week. And after 48 hours, the alcoholic fermentation is through. You have your alcohol in there, it won't get any higher, but there is other bacteria, lactobacteria, and even other bacteria going on that change the flavors of your wash. And that's why the distillery wants to have 168 hours of fermentation. The longest in the Scotch industry and probably the longest on the earth, but I'm not quite sure about that. But definitely the longest in the Scotch industry. If you ever smell on a wash bag, always be careful. If it's still working in the first 38 hours, it can be really harsh. You can become unconscious, drop in, and you're dead. But if you do, always do it like that, and you feel, okay, this is fine. You can smell inside. And this is amazing. It's really tropical, really fruity. For me, it's overripe melon with a bit of overripe sugar melon with a bit of watermelon in it. Maybe some, it feels a little bit like that water ice cream that I had when I was young. So it's really beautiful. It's very intense and very fruity, fresh fruity, tropical fruity, and yeah, that's what you need if you want to have a really gentle, fruity Highland whiskey. And yeah, this is the perfect basis for distilling. And yeah, let's walk over to the still room. So this here is the still house of Tomatin, and they used to have a massive amount of stills. It used to go on this side, and they had 23 stills, 12 wash stills, 11 spirit stills, and they were all coal fired. So the coal used to come in back in here, and there were guys using shovels and shoveling under the stills, and the fire was going up and heating the still. Coal fire is very hot, very harsh to the still, and very fast distillation. And the way you would set the temperature at the still was really a bit hard to manage. Today it's just a lever, it's just steam. But back in the days you had to manage the coal fire. And if you put in too much coal fire, you had to get it out a little bit. So boiling over was a problem. If they would have watched through the watch glass at the top, and they would have seen, okay, we're boiling over, run down and try to get the fire down, and it was already too late. So what they had a string, and you could pull it, and then there would be a ball hitting against the still, and you could hear if you're at the point of overboiling or not. So when you heard the wrong sound, if it doesn't felt that hollow, then you would just turn it down a bit with the coal and you would not boil over. So this was done on all sides. So yeah, it was, the working floor was kind of below the stills, which is unusual nowadays. So today they have 16 stills, 10 in working conditions. So 6 wash stills and 4 spirit stills. You have 2 wash bags with each 45,000 liters volume are spread out on 6 wash stills. So every wash still has about 15,000 liters being filled into them, and then is being distilled. So let's go up, have a look at the stills, and I've seen something really nice at a spirit stills that I want to film. This here is one of the spirit stills, and the design is from 1897, and it was designed by Alexander Mackenzie, one of the original shareholders, and it said he was being paid in shares for designing the stills. And the design of the stills is exactly the same as for the wash stills. So the distillery has only one design for spirit and wash still. And yeah, what is also a bit extraordinary is the amount of time it takes for distillation. The wash distillation takes around 13 hours and the spirit distillation takes around 12 hours. This is pretty long, and it shows you, yeah, it is a pretty slow distillation. If you look at the stills, you would expect, yeah, it's a fast distillation. They are, yeah, pretty dark already, but that's just because most of the stills are already very old, and most of the stills are not liqueured, so you have a lot of this, yeah, blackening of the stills. The Tomatin distillation is aiming at a very, yeah, gentle, soft spirit. For the Cubocan, they want to have a bit of more spiciness, a bit more, yeah, a bit stronger character. So what they do is you have your lower cutting point for the spirit stills, and they lower it a bit, so you get more of that spicy character that is distilled in the end of this distilling into the Cubocan than you have with the Tomatin. Yeah, so this is then the new make spirit, and let's put this into the casks. So I'm standing here in one of the dunnage warehouses of the distillery. The distillery has 2 dunnage warehouses, 11 racked warehouses, and they have a huge capacity that they could store on site back from the day when they were really, really big. And yes, they could store up to 250,000 casks on site. They are currently at 170,000 casks, but they're not all from Tomatin, so they rent out space. They get casks from other distilleries, have the space rented out, and then they, yeah, have their own casks also stored on site. So no Tomatin casks are stored somewhere else. They're all on site, which is kind of a good thing. And yeah, what they also do have, they have a little cooperage here. It's not a cooperage for building casks, but it's more of a repair site. And that is helping you a lot when you buy casks. You can just go around to Italy, Spain, Portugal, and have a look around, find casks. And even if they have a bit of a dubious shape and you might think, oh, are they leaking or not, you can just buy them, send them home, and your cooperage can check them if they're airtight, if they're good, do maintenance on them. So that's pretty good if you want to get casks and you're on, yeah, a buying tour. What is also really nice is the variation of casks you have in here. You have port pipes, you have sherry casks, sherry butts, sherry puncheons, you have hogsheads, you have barrels, and many more, Madeira, and all these. You find them in all the bottlings the distillery has, because they do have quite a number of bottlings. And here we have a nice display for the visitors, and that displays one cask from every year of distillation that they have left. And it starts with 1967, which is really amazing that to have a cask from 1967 in here. The next one is 1971. It goes even all the way up to 2018. But yeah, 2018, 19, 20, you don't really have to put on the cask because everybody knows yet they do have spirit from these years. Yeah, so that was it with the production. This is how the Tomatin whiskey is made. And now let's try some of that whiskey. So I'm sitting here with Graham Unson, right. 31 years experience in the whiskey industry, 10 years here at Tomatin. A lot of experience. You're the master distiller here. But yeah, that job comes with a bit more responsibility than just distilling. So thank you very much for having us here.
Well, I'm delighted to have you here. It's good to see you here. This last couple of years we've not had many visitors, so it's tremendous to have someone like yourself actually come along and join us here at Tomatin.
Yeah, I'm really glad that I can be up here in Scotland again. It's just very nice, and you got really a nice distillery and really nice surrounding here.
It is, yeah. I mean, we're 15 miles or so from Inverness, 20 minutes drive. And despite that, it's almost like you're out in the wilderness here on the top of the Mona Lisa Mountains. It's beautiful scenery, nice place to both live and work, I would say. Yeah.
Yes, it's nice to have a bigger city nearby, and just the Great Highlands. They got really good fishing grounds back down there, and it's just that the mountains are already snowed in a little bit.
A wee bit, yes, a wee bit. And as for the fishing goes, my fishing skills are basically nil.
Mine as well. I've tried fishing in the sea, but I only catch kelp then.
I know the feeling. I feel your pain.
So, we got 4 whiskies here. So, where are we starting?
We will start with the legacy. Our it's a non-aged spirit, but it's one that's quite an interesting whiskey on how it actually came to be. It's probably one of the more simple recipes, but even within that, the history of how it came about is quite interesting, because we have 29 houses on site, so quite a large proportion of our staff live here. And what we did, it would be about a year, maybe 2 years after I joined Tomatin, that Stephen Bremner, who was at the time our marketing director, he's now our managing director, came to me and said, Graham, can you have a look at our stock profile and see what we can do to make a Tomatin that's probably a bit younger, or at least appeals to a younger market. We wanted to be reasonably light and sweet, easy to drink. And he gave me a few parameters that he was wanting to be within. So I went away and I looked at the stocks that we have. And I came back to him with 5 different recipes for this new product. So between Stephen, Graham Nicholson, who's one of now a sales director, and myself, we nosed the 5 samples and went, don't really like that one, not too sure about that one. But the other 3 that were left, we went, well, they're all really, really good. And what we decided to do was, rather than us make that call ourselves, we invited every member of staff to either come into the office here and nose and taste the whiskey, or if they were driving, which a lot of them were obviously, to come in, take 3 sample bottles home, labelled A, B and C, taste them, nose them with their family, friends, and then come back in a few days later and tell us which one they preferred. They didn't know any of the recipes or anything, so what they came back with then was actually, if I remember rightly, it was actually sample A was the favourite out of the lot. So it was really all our colleagues within Tomatin Distillery Company Limited that chose the final recipe for the legacy.
Ah, okay.
And it's there to sort of remind everyone about our legacy, you know, the fact that we were founded over 120 years ago, that, you know, there's a lot of people who live on site. We have a lot of history of members of the same family have born, brought up here, worked here, next generations followed on and such like. So it's all a sort of reflection of that into this final whiskey, which they helped choose the final recipe of. So
yeah, I'm really excited now how that whiskey will smell and feel, because I've just been to your wash bags, and that was incredible. Okay, I've had quite a whiff of wash bags in my tours, but this was even beyond the normal fruitiness and went really far into that tropical fermented fruit, overripe fruit, watermelon, and I'm excited if I can find that in here.
I think you should. I mean, that's the one thing we always try to do with all the Tomatin range is keep our house style, for want of a better description. The house style really is that sort of soft, sweet but not excessively sweet. But really the fruitiness needs to shine through there. That's what I would look for in a new make spirit. But I would also like to see a lot of that lasting right through all the maturation into the final product and being enhanced by the casks we use. So for the legacy, it's slightly unusual in that we'll use American virgin oak in this for a certain percentage, along with first fill ex-bourbons. So that the first fill ex-bourbons, you're always going to get that sort of coconut, vanilla type sweetness, which enhances the natural sweetness we'll find in the new make. And then just to give it an extra boost, the virgin oak are in there, and that really gives it more of what you would expect to find in a bourbon, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, so marrying that together, the legacy is very, very sweet characteristics that come through. You get the sort of toffee caramel type sweetness, the vanilla, the coconut. You know, it's that family of aromas and flavours that you will find in there. But always in the background, you get that rich fruit character in there as well. You know, the softer fruits, as you say, coming through on the nose.
Yeah, I
you
like
find
it.
them on the taste as well.
Yeah, it's more of a bourbon style than I would have expected. But yeah, if you say virgin American oak, then yes, definitely.
Yeah. You're talking around about 15% of the maturation is in virgin oak casks. So it has. We don't want to go any more than that because virgin oak can be quite overwhelming in its character. You know,
yes.
So keeping it at around about the 15% mark ensures that it doesn't overwhelm the flavours. It just really gives them that wee bit more zest, more sort of character in there, so you get a really easy to drink but flavoursome. That's what we're trying to do with this. Great for cocktails. As well as, you know, a nice warm summer's day, which is not really outside at the moment.
Yeah, but also a nice winter day.
A nice winter's day as well, yeah. It's a nice easy dram to actually drink, and that's really what we're after.
Slange?
Slange. Flavour-wise, it's quite similar to what you find on the nose. There's not any huge surprises jumping out in there, which is again something that we were aiming to do. It's certainly not a one-dimensional whiskey. You know, there's a range of characters in there, but the nose and the flavours are quite similar. You know, there's not a huge divergence there.
It's nice fruity, has that vanilla, that caramel, that bit of a toffees note in there. It's a nice bourbon style whiskey. Would have expected less of an oaky touch to it. It has an oaky touch to it as well.
Yeah, and that's the virgin oak that brings
That's
that.
the virgin oak that just gives a bit more volume to it.
It does, yeah. It does. It stops it from being too much one-dimensional. It gives that wee bit of spiciness, I would argue, in there, the virgin oak, you know, coming directly from the wood, obviously. So that it gives it a bit more character, and that's why it works so well in cocktails. It's because there is that depth there. You know, it's not just vanilla and nothing else. You know, there's quite a bit more to it.
I like it. It's a nice everyday dram.
It is, yeah. I'm slightly biased because this was actually the first whiskey that I basically developed from day one. You know, as you said, I worked in the whiskey industry quite a few years now, despite the youthful good looks, obviously. But I mean, this is the first one that I've really been responsible for bringing it to where it is. So it's one that I think justifiably proud of, because I had the involvement all the way through the development of it to get it to where it is now, and I still look after the recipe for it and select the casks, and I have to go and nose them and taste them from time to time. It's a terrible job, you know, but somebody
yeah, really hard. So yeah, the distillery is quite a place on its own. I've heard that you have 30 houses down that the distillery owns, and Is that like a big family, or how does that work?
It is to a great extent, yeah. I mean, the distillery itself, it's had a lot of phases in its history, in its life. You know, we founded in 1897, but then in the early 1900s it was shut down, then reopened. You know, it's a lot of opens and closings through over the years. And then when it got to the 1970s, it was actually became the biggest single malt distillery in Scotland, and it held that title for quite a lot of years until just in the sort of late 1990s, early 2000s type idea. Because of that, and because of the perceived remoteness, although we're only 20 minutes from Inverness now with modern roads, if you go back to the turn of the century, it was quite a trek to get here. So the houses were needed on site for the workers of the distillery and warehousing to actually live here. Most distilleries now have sold them on, but we decided no, we would keep them. So it does give almost a family type or a small village type atmosphere around the distillery, because the houses are right in the middle. Really, you know, you've got warehouses down at the bottom of the site beyond the railway line. You've got more warehouses and production site here, but the houses are intermingled with all that. So that it does mean that the people who live here and work here, it's not a job, you know, it's a lifestyle, because everything revolves around the distillery. I'm lucky enough to have lived in 4 or 5 distilleries in my time. My kids grew up in a distillery, you know, and it's an absolutely fantastic place for kids to grow up and play. You know, you've got, okay, in the modern world where health and safety's everything, you know, do you want them going and playing amongst empty casks? Probably not, but my son could recognise a barrel, a hogshead or a butt from about 50 metres away when he was 2, you know, just by looking at them. So you do get that. It's a different atmosphere because of the fact so many people live here, and it becomes your life. You raise your kids here. It's a fantastic playground, as I say, and that's probably why both my children have ended up in the whisky industry as well.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. And for as company wise, you do have the people who rent the house. They all do have jobs.
Well, that's it, yes, exactly.
They all pay rent.
That's it. And they pay the rent, and they can't actually avoid paying rent because we can take it out of the pay package.
But it doesn't come to that, because it's a family. It's one community. So
it is. And the
many people are like generations here, or
I mean, the former master distiller, Douglas Campbell, who I think he was almost finished his apprenticeship when he left. He worked here for about 54 years. His son works here as a warehouse operator. You know, so there's husbands and wives. Our cooper, his father drives the forklift. His mother is actually the reception, or the office manager, I should say, downstairs here. You know, so our company secretary is married to one of the head warehousemen. You know, so
it's a small town.
It is a very, very small town.
It was a bit confusing when we drove in. We were like, okay, this is the distillery. So wait, there's a schoolgirl going to school, and their house is here. Wait, we've already left the distillery.
To my mind, it's a fantastic atmosphere.
Yeah, it's a fantastic atmosphere.
It just makes it more homely, more, you know.
Yeah, we also run a family business, and family business, I like it. It's just the way of life.
It is. I mean, if my family had followed the same rules as we kind of do here at Tomatin, I may actually have owned Highland Park, since that was one of my forefathers that founded it. Magnus Junsen, yeah. But sadly, he didn't leave it to me in his will, so I've had to move elsewhere.
Yeah. So the next one is the 12 now.
The 12-year-old, yeah. 12-year-old is really our core expression, for want of a better word. It's the key one for us. It's our bread and butter. It's the biggest seller. Legacy's catching up, but 12 is still the biggest seller. It's the most complicated recipe of all the whiskies that we do by a long way. But it needs to be. It's not one that I've been involved in the creation of. We've had it for a long while now. So I view myself more as the custodian. I look after it. I try and enhance it in certain areas where I can, improve on what's there, but it's mostly about consistency. So the one thing that the 12-year-old always tries to do it's achieve a lovely sort of harmonious balance. You know, when you nose it, no single feature should dominate. When you taste it, again, no single feature should dominate. It should be an interesting journey, for want of a better word, again, to get to all the subtle characters that are in there, both in the nose and in the flavour. So you could argue round about a third of this will be matured in ex-bourbon casks. Now that can be first fill, full maturation, second fill, full maturation, and some finishing. Same goes with about a third will be sherry casks. So that will be first fill Oloroso, second fill Oloroso, and some Oloroso finishes. We also then have some decharred recharred casks, and we have some refills that are probably third or fourth fill, all going into this in different percentages. And even then, ex-bourbons are relatively standard in the whisky that will come out the other end after 12 years. Sherry casks, it's a much more difficult sort of character to guarantee what will come out. A lot of the whisky industry in Scotland now are using seasoned casks, you know, rather than using ex-Bodega casks. Bodega casks, you have no idea how old they are. They could be 10-year-old, they could be 50 years old. And the influence that they will have on our spirit is variable. So we get some ex-Bodega casks because we still like to use them, but we also use sherry casks, which are actually new oak, which are then seasoned for us over in Jerez, so that we have a much better knowledge of what impact they will have on our whiskies. So it makes the nosing and sampling of each tanker that goes off for bottling slightly easier.
Yeah, the sherry casks are also being refilled at the bodega, so yeah, that is.
Yep.
It's probably a big difference between a refill than whiskey cask than a seasoned one.
It is, yeah, and that's why we still like to use both, because the ex-Bodega casks are more traditional. But the seasoned ones make it easier for us to know what we can expect in the final product coming out of the cask after the maturation.
Yeah.
You know, but by using both, it leaves a bit of flexibility in there and a bit of unknowns, because sometimes you will go and nose a cask in the warehouse and go, wow, you know, that's not what I expected. That is unbelievably good. You know, whereas when you know with the seasoned casks what you're going to get, the chances of that pleasant surprise might be slightly less. So by doing both, it gives us the best of both worlds. Yeah. That's really what we're trying to do.
Okay. Slange?
Slange again, yes. So hopefully you see what I mean about the balance in there. You know, you get the sweetness, you get the fruitiness, you also get the sort of rich dried fruit, like fruit cake, coming through from the sherry. Hints of maybe even nuttiness coming through from the sherry, you know, so that there's quite a wide spectrum of flavours and aromas in there, but they all appear at different times, and if you added a splash of water you would find them different again. There's great complexity in there, which is
the first thing is what I find was a kind of a softness, creaminess to it.
Yep.
Then it's a nice sweetness that is it's going into many directions, I would say.
The follow-on flavour, I'm getting more of the spiciness coming through now. It wasn't there initially.
The follow-up is the aftertaste is more of that intensity.
So to me, this is a whiskey that appeals to a wide range of people. It's very arguably dangerously easy to drink, in fact. You know, but it's one that it doesn't have a huge amount of sherry, it doesn't have a huge amount of peatiness, it doesn't have a huge amount of anything. It's all quite harmonious, as I say, which to me is what it really should be. When I first came here, the 12-year-old always struck me as being well balanced, and that's what I'm trying to continue with it.
It's a great everyday dram as well. That what I would say is just, it's a little bit of a relaxed, soft, everyday kind of dram. The other one was a bit more additive, and it had great oak in it as well. This one is, the oaky side is there, but it's not not too big.
The legacy is like a rebellious teenager. You know, it's quite exciting, quite vibrant. The 12-year-old is that bit more mature. It's calmed down. It's just nice, pleasant, easy drinking whiskey.
So I had a bit a look around even what wasn't active production, and we've seen that you still have some old wash bags that you don't use anymore because they were not that in great shape, and you still had another mash tun over there, and you still had tons of place for stills. You have 2 stills you're not running, so you have tons of place in your warehouse, so you could easily expand. Is that and with demand of whiskey going up that way, are you planning to expand?
We are looking to increase next year. We'll increase by around about 250,000 litres of alcohol production. You know, so that's a reasonable increase. So we'll be up to about 1.85 million next year. Year after that, we'll probably look to get up nearer the 2 million again. And again, for the next 5 years anyway, we think we will increase production. It's one of the things that, you know, we can't just decide, right, if we ran 24/7, 48 weeks of the year, we could probably do about 4.5–5 million litres of alcohol here. So it's a big site.
Oh, okay.
You know. But
without new wash bags?
Without any increase in wash bags.
168 hours of fermentation?
Yeah, we should be able to.
Okay.
That's 4.5 million if we keep everything exactly as it is in production.
Okay.
But we may have to look at having some shorter fermentations as well. That's all things we would look at if we decided to go down that route. So we've got quite a gap from where we're at to where we could be. So that the amount of investment in new kit, new equipment, there's none.
You don't need to if you still have room for 4.5 million litres.
We have what, 14 warehouses on site, 195,000 cask spaces roughly. We've got 167,000 in there at the moment. So if we went up to the 4 million even mark again, that would require a bit more warehousing.
Okay, so warehousing.
So warehousing, we could put more in. We've got space. But within the next 5 to 10 years, we would definitely start to run out of space. We have some of the casks on site we don't own. We've rented out space over the years to other whisky companies. So we would need to get them to remove their casks to give us more space to put ours into. So that wouldn't be a switch that we could flick overnight. It would cost us a lot in production terms as well.
But you can gradually increase
we are looking to
working
ramp
into
up
it.
Again. Yeah.
Okay.
We're looking to ramp up again, and it's an interesting time to be involved in Tomatin because we've gone from being a whiskey basically produced to go into other people's blends. If you go back to the 70s and 80s, even into the 90s, in fact. Whereas now we are very much about the brand itself, Tomatin as a single malt, and what we can do with that going forward. We have our own blends as well that we need to cater for, so we still do reciprocal deals with other companies to get their malts and grains and things in. But yeah, we can definitely ramp up production here relatively easily. If we then decided that 4.5–5 million isn't enough, and we're talking a few years down the line.
That would be.
I think I might be retired by then, but again, we do have a second mash tun. It would need a lot of we would need to put the side back in it for a start because it's opened up to let tourists and visitors see in it. The second mill we probably wouldn't need. We could get away with one. We do have a second mill on site. It was taken out just last year, and we're hopefully going to get it trimmed up to go on display.
But I think it would get a lot of money on the second-hand market because these mills are really in demand.
Oh, they are, yeah. And it's a Porteous mill, dating back to around about the 1930s, I believe. What we want to do is not sell it. We want to open it up so that people coming here can see inside it. Try and get the screen and everything back as well so that folk can see inside the screen to see how it operates, weighing machine, all of that we still have. So if we can rebuild that but opened up so that folk can see it. We already have the mash tun, a full lauter tun, the old one. I think it was the first full lauter in Scotland to be used. It's in place still, but the side was taken out of it again to let people see inside it. We have a condenser that's opened up. You know, it's trying to be more educational in the tours that we provide here.
I've seen that you have some displays that are really not with the regular types. So
but that's part of the fun we can have with having a distillery that used to be so big we had 2 of everything. We can now use 1 of everything for a display and actually use 1 of everything in the production process. So it's just something that bit different, you know, that because we were so big back in the day, that we no longer need to be. We're no longer selling lots of new spirit to other whisky companies, and that was a decision taken to put us in charge of our own destiny, so to speak.
Okay, so the next one is now a bit of a darker spirit.
It is indeed. It's slightly older, but much different colour, much darker. A sort of russety brown colour, perhaps, would be a good description for it. It is our 14-year-old. The 14-year-old is a reasonably simple recipe again. And this was one that, once more, I was heavily involved in after I came here. So the 14-year-old's probably been on the go now for about 8 years, somewhere in that region anyway. It is one that we wanted to help complement the fruity sweet flavours, the house style, with something just that bit richer, deeper and more vibrant. And what we decided to use was actually ex-tawny casks, tawny port casks. Yeah. So that we import them directly from Portugal. The original ones we got back when we first started this whole experiment were about 30, 40, 50 years old. You know, but they'd been used quite a few times. And with the tawny port, it's not as sweet as a red port, a ruby port. You get much more of nutty characters coming through in it. You'll find that in the whisky, hopefully, but what you'll also find in there is lots of sort of mixed fruit type characteristics. You know, the combination of, we use refill casks for most to go into the port casks for a finishing period of around about 2 years. It can sometimes be up 2.5 and can sometimes be down just under the 2 years, but on average it'll be between 2 and 2.5 years, the finish in the port cask. If we matured fully in it, the port cask would overwhelm a lot of our subtle house style type characteristics. So by using the finish, we can help complement that flavours with a completely different set of characters coming in. Again, not aimed to overwhelm, but just to mix and merge in there.
I like it. It has a bit of a nuttiness to it.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
For me, I'm not quite sure if it's just association of smell that it has that is that nuttiness that usually comes for me with chocolate. So is there a chocolatey type in there? Maybe I just put it in there because of the almonds that always come with the chocolate.
Yep, I definitely find chocolate in this. It's
you do?
One of the key,
okay, maybe
key
it's not
characters
then.
I'll find in there, yeah. And it's normally a dark chocolate that I will find on the nose, but when you taste it, sometimes I'll find it more of a milk chocolate. You know, it almost evolves that wee bit.
It's hard to tell because you could say it's a dark chocolate, but with all the sweetness, you tend to want to say, yeah, probably a milk chocolate.
Yeah, or even a white chocolate. It's a very complex whiskey again, which is it's one of the things that we would expect with a Tomatin is to have that complexity there. Our new make spirit is relatively complex, you know, so that will follow through into the final product. But no, this one, it's also at 46% alcohol by volume, this one. You know, so it's got a slight more alcohol in it, non-chill filtered, etc. As you would expect at that strength. A natural colour coming entirely from the port casks. Obviously there's a hint of colour there from the refill cask initially, but the vast majority of this deeper colour comes from the use of the tawny port casks. But to me, it's another example of the whisky industry is inclined to suffer from a bit of stigma on the use of finishing. You know, it gets bad press sometimes for being, it's trying to improve really poor quality whiskies. It's not. To me, that is another tool in our toolbox to allow us to create whiskies that are that bit different. You know, that you could mature fully in port casks, but as I say, it would probably be overwhelming. It'd be too intense. Yeah. You know, so
if you, I don't know why that should be bad press. If you improve a whiskey, why is that a bad press? If you improve a whiskey, that's a good thing.
That's my view on it. Slanger. white chocolate we spoke about earlier, I'm finding that in there, a sweetness, but it's also definitely this mixed sort of fruits and berries almost in there. You know, that it's a different range of characters altogether from the 12.
It's definitely a different kind of fruitiness that we had in the other one.
Yeah.
I have a bit of that, house character, distillery character going on, but it's more of a nuance. The cask is quite strong in here, and it's more of a grapey. For me, it is grapey as in wine grapey, but also a bit of like fresh grapes as well. And dried fruit character, chocolatey character, nuttiness, more on the nose than in the taste, but still pretty nice.
It is, yeah. I mean, this is quite a popular whiskey. It's verging on being too popular. That there are limited amounts of port pipes that we can access of the quality that we want to use. So it's a case of, you know, the 14-year-old, we have to be careful on how much of it we actually sell worldwide. Which is a great problem to have, don't get me wrong, it's fantastic, you know, but it could probably sell more in more countries if we were to export it everywhere. But there are finite amounts of stock we have. We're building that slowly, and this one it's one of the core range. It'll be there for forever.
If you increase your production now, then 14 years in time, then we have the whiskey.
Yes, that's it.
That's a bit of the thing with the whiskey industry. You have a bit of a long lead time.
Yeah. It's one of the, you know, the legacy is the youngest of the expressions we have here. The virgin oak casks in there will be round about 5 years old, approximately. If you leave it much longer than that, it becomes too astringent.
It will be a strong whiskey then. This is a nice everyday dram. I would say the 14-year-old is a bit beyond that. It's one that we would say it goes into the, you can have it more often, but it's more of a one that you want to savor.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Really focus in, maybe not read a book while doing it or watching TV while doing it. You may more focus on the whiskey because it's just, it's that good.
It is, but one of the challenges we have is we use bourbon casks in the legacy. Well, if we sell too much legacy, there's not enough bourbon casks left to go into the 12-year-old. If we sell too much whiskey at either legacy or 12-year-old, we don't have enough stocks left to go into the 14, into the 18, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah,
you know, so it's a difficult stock profile to manage for all whiskey distillers.
Managing a warehouse and having so many different expressions is probably really a big job.
That's why I have no hair left. It's all been pulled out over the years.
But in the end, it's better to have a big warehouse with a lot of stock in it than to have an empty warehouse. So,
Absolutely.
So I've seen you have still got quite some capacity left.
We do.
So is it possible that you stock more? Or?
Yeah, I think we will. I mean, as I said earlier, we're going to increase production each year in a gentle step-by-step basis. That means we will need more warehousing capacity because we're obviously planning to sell more 12-year-olds, you know, in 10 years' time than we currently sell. So we need more space to hold that to mature. So yeah, it is something that it's one of the projects I'm looking at the moment is how to make best use of the warehousing we have. Which warehouses are in need of repair because the last one built was in 1975. Some of them are much older than that. So we may need to look at building new warehouses or renovating the ones we've got. So all of that is part of the sort of complicated calculations we've got to make going forward. So we're looking at really a 5 to 10 year plan. That's part of my job at the moment, is looking at that and trying to put budgets in place for the next 5 years to help us develop that. And there's so many unknowns. We don't know how many people will continue to drink whiskey. If India comes online, that could be a massive number of people drinking Scotch whiskey, you know, and there's not enough Scotch whiskey in Scotland, you know, to cover that. So there's so many uncertainties there that we can only try and build up stocks as best we can with a semi-clear crystal ball with an idea of what we want to do going forward.
Yeah, I think
it's never easy.
The biggest whiskey in the world is an Indian whiskey.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think these people will also yeah, the whole situation, economic situation, will lift in the end, and they will become richer, and they will become more. Yeah, looking for more expensive, more quality. So I guess that, from my point of view, probably will go up with the demand of whiskey. We're just seeing the demand increase over the last 2 decades for single malt whiskey was just really, really good. And yeah, it can always have a dip like in the 80s with the blend, but I'm not quite sure. I would say probably not.
Yeah,
and if to have a great stock is better than to have not have a great stock.
Definitely, because ultimately, even if it's sitting in the cask in warehouse, it's becoming more valuable, so that your stock value, your company value, is only ever going to increase, even if it's sitting there. You know, cash flow is obviously going to be a problem from a business point of view if we don't sell enough. But it's good to have that stock sitting there for the future, that we can hopefully increase sales in a controlled manner. You know,
how influential is your mother company for that?
To be fair to them, they're not really. I mean, obviously, the majority shareholders are both located in Japan. We were the first distillery in Scotland to be wholly Japanese owned. They don't tell us how to make the whiskey. They don't tell us how to sell the whiskey. You know, they're pretty good at leaving us at arm's length. You can look at it 2 ways. Either they think we're doing a great job and they leave us to get on with it, which I hope is the case, or they've just given up all hope of trying to get us to do things right. So hopefully the former rather than the latter. But no, they are good that they leave us to our own devices to a great extent to make and sell and promote the whiskey how we see fit. Okay. And I think they're quite happy when they look at the bottom line each year as to how we're doing. Okay, and so, which is obviously it's important to them. Yeah,
if that is running great, then I think they will have no problem with that. But they do have experience, so they come over, try the products as well.
Occasionally, I mean, the one of the shareholders, the smaller shareholder, Kokubu, are actually our importers and distributing company in Japan. Okay. So we get lots more of them coming here than we do actually of our majority shareholder, Takara Shuso. Although Takara do have a person based in the UK. He's now in London. He used to be based here at the distillery. So that they had an interest obviously in what we were doing, but as I say, in fairness, they never tried to tell us what to do. They were just monitoring.
So they're just happy to come once a year and go like, yeah, still good, go ahead.
Yeah, pretty much.
So Cuboken is now the peated expression.
It is, yes.
What kind of Cuboken do we have here?
This one is what we call Creation 2. Cuboken, again, only started to sell about 7 or 8 years ago. We started using peated malt on a small scale, like a couple of weeks in the year, a couple of 100 tons of malt type idea, way back in 2005. And then left that to mature, but didn't really have a plan as to what we were going to do with it. So round about, what would that been, 2012, 2013, somewhere around there, 2014, we came up with this concept of Cuboken. We didn't want to just call it peated Tomatin. We needed something a bit different, make it almost a brand in its own right. So that's where the Cuboken idea came from. The original Cuboken, which is still the signature as is now known, the sort of core expression, it's a combination of first fill sherry, first fill ex-bourbon, first fill virgin, and some refill, about 15% refill. It's the recipe for that. But one expression isn't really that interesting to get people's imagination going. So we've done a few, we deconstructed that and had the virgin oak, the ex-bourbon, the sherry. That's been sold in limited editions in the past. But this last couple of years, what we've decided to come up with is creations. So creations 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't know where we'll finish. And this is actually creation 2. Now this one, it's unusual because normally when you do a wood finish, like our port, the 14-year-old in port wood, it's one type of cask you finish in to give you a characteristic. This is unusual that it uses 2 different types of casks. So in here we've got European virgin oak casks, but also Japanese shochu casks. Married together.
Virgin European oak casks.
Yep.
Okay.
So it gives you different character. European oak is completely different to American oak. You know, that you get much more of the sherry type flavours actually. Yep. It's spicier, richer notes coming from the European oak. American oak's much more vanilla, coconut, you know, sweeter type flavours.
And the Japanese was
shochu. Yeah, shochu, which is a Japanese drink, a spirit, not dissimilar to whiskey, but made with rice and such like. So that marrying the two cask styles together was where this creation came from. So by marrying two unusual styles of casks is where the Kubokan creations is that bit different. You know, the peated new make spirit that we make, if you go back to 2005, we were using malt with a ppm, the smokiness, the phenols, of around about 18 parts per million. But that ramped up over the years, so that this last few years it's been up well into the 30s, even into the 40s. It's not going to nose and taste like an Ardbeg or Lafroig. The smokiness, in fact, on the nose, the smokiness is quite subtle.
Very subtle.
It's not intense on the nose at all, the smokiness. And that, to me, it's an intriguing thing, that it's almost a smoky whiskey for people who don't like smoky whiskies. You know, because you tell folk, yeah, this is a relatively heavily peated whiskey with a high phenol content, but you don't find it on the nose, you find it on the taste. And even then, you don't get it on the taste immediately. It takes a second or two before you get that smokiness. So you get the sweetness, the fruity characters coming through there again at the outset with the Kubokan. So this is something that we will be doing on an ongoing basis. Going forward, we'll be trying to marry two different styles of casks together to create the next Kubokan, along with the standard, the signature, which is the ongoing expression all the time. And we may look to develop the range further in the future. You know, who knows what the future is going to hold. But on the nose, it's not that dissimilar to the Tomatin. You don't get that intense smokiness, really. There's a hint of it there.
There is a hint of it in there.
Yeah.
And it has a nice subtle sweetness to it, but a bit of fresh fruitiness. But it's not a very intense one. I would have expected more intense with fresh Virgin European oak cask.
Yeah.
You don't have much Virgin European oak cask going around there, huh?
There's not. No, there's not. It's an interesting combination to have married together. I would love to say I did all the work on this, but in reality I didn't. I was involved in trying to supply the casks, source the casks, etc. for this. But Scott Adamson, who you met earlier, our global brands ambassador, Scott works with me quite a lot on the sourcing of the casks. He also works with me quite a lot on the recipes, and Kubokan is one that he really has taken on board, and I've left him to his own devices to a great extent to see what he wants to try and create with that, because ultimately, you know, I'm going to retire in between 5 and 10 years time probably, you know, so that someone needs to be there to understand where the Tomatin recipes come from, what we look for in the wood, but also in the Kubokan and in our own blends, you know. So Scott's learning that side of the business, the sort of blender side, and he's got a good nose on him, a good attention to detail, you know. So I think this is an extremely interesting whiskey.
Yeah. No, cheers.
Sorry, I was racing ahead of you there, Slange.
Slange.
I was too excited. So the sweetness is there. It's again 46%, but it's reasonably smooth and creamy. And it's only after the initial taste that you get the smokiness starting to show through.
The initial mouth intake, I was amazed that it was pretty easy, but now it grows. Spiciness, you swallow it, you get the smokiness. Yeah, I would call it medium smokiness now.
Yeah.
In nose, I would say maximum lightly, maybe unpeated.
Yeah.
But in the taste, you do feel the smokiness coming through. So this is one of these hiding smoking whiskies.
Yes, it is. It is. It's quite an intriguing whiskey.
I expected it to be even a bit more harsh, a bit more stronger with the lower cutting point and smokiness in there and virgin oak casks. But it's great. It's still balanced enough.
Exactly.
It's more on the stronger side.
It is, yeah. It's much more robust, but it is actually quite an easy whiskey. That's still, again, at 46%, you know, so it could probably do with a splash or two of water going into it. That's up to the individual. It's a very subjective thing, adding water, but no, it is an easy whiskey, again, to drink. It's not heavily challenging. You don't go, I need something to, you know, you can drink it as it is neat, and it's very appropriate. It's very accessible.
Yeah, I've just got to know a bit more the lightly peated whiskies now. I've found some lightly peated, because lightly peated whiskies are rare.
Yeah.
This one is a bit of a medium peated. They're also pretty rare. You have a lot of highly peated whiskies.
Yeah.
Tons of people want to do highly peated, and tons of people love highly peated whiskey, including me.
Me too. At the end of an evening, not at the start.
If you do it at the start, then
you can't
it's
taste
dominating.
It does, yeah.
But I love it. I love it. So yeah, great overview about the whiskies. There are a lot more expressions.
Yeah.
A lot more expressions, even for different countries, and older expressions. And
there is, yeah. I mean, the oldest we've done so far is a 50-year-old, which was quite amazing. We have the Where Is 6 collection here. This one, sadly, is empty, 1971, but we have that. The final one to be released, I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is yet. It will be released in the not too distant future. It is actually my favourite cask ever.
Okay.
Sitting up in number 6 warehouse here.
Oh yeah, there's that heavy stuff in there.
Yeah, there's some impressive. I'm fortunate that with the job I've had for the last 3 decades plus, I get to taste a lot of whiskies from different companies, different people. You know, it's one of the whiskey industry in general is very closely connected. You know, we all know
Scotland,
one another. So that we get to try and share our whiskies and such like. But I do think that those casks are the best I've ever tried anywhere. You know, of all the distilleries I've worked in and all the samples that I've had over the years, there's just something about them. It's so complex. So rich and so deep, but at the same time so accessible, so easy to drink. So it's one to look out for in the future for sure. But yeah, it's a wide range of whiskies.
But it's always how much will it cost? And that would be because the old casks are really rare. But
they are, yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for showing us the core range of Tomatin, and yeah, thank you very much for having us at the distillery. It was a great time, and yeah, thank you very much for watching this video. And if you found this video interesting, then please feel free to share it with your friends who might also be interested in whiskey videos. Yeah, and yeah, see you next time.